Thank you all for joining us here today for this insight into construction costs and where they may be headed. My name's Simon Clark, Director of Sustainable Homes Melbourne and President of the Sustainable Builders Alliance. Now, I have spent a great deal of my life in this construction industry and have ridden the wild wave the industry has thrown at us the last few years. I've been a builder for 16 years and operated SHM for the past 12 of those years. So I clearly have an invested interest in this topic of construction costs. I'm joined by Nisha Patel. Some of you will know her friendly face. She's the design and client consultant at Sustainable Homes Melbourne, and she'll be our techie for this event. So any tech issues, you can message Nisha via chat, and hopefully she can sort them out. She'll also be asking me any questions that you guys have at the end of the presentation. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work, and play, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. As we walk upon this land, we do so with gratitude and a commitment to learning, listening, and contributing to a future where respect, reconciliation, and sustainability guide our way. Well, this is lovely. I've been involved in dozens of information sessions such as this, but never under the Sustainable Homes Melbourne banner. So it's nice to be doing it ourselves, and I think we may make a habit of it. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. The presentation today will take around 20 to 25 minutes, and we will make some time at the end to try to answer any of your questions. I highly recommend that you have a good viewing screen in front of you for the presentation. I will try to do my best to explain some of the graphs and data, though a picture does speak 1,000 words. And any questions you have, be sure to place them in the Q&A section below. You'll see that on the right-hand side of your screen, and there is also a chat box. Chat is for chat, but if you want a question answered by myself or propose a question, add them to the Q&A. It makes it much easier for Nisha to manage them. So the presentation today will be looking at construction costs and the key factors that will be influencing construction costs over the next few years. Now, before we kick things off, we'd love to know who is joining us today. A quick poll question will come up. Are you an architect or designer? Are you looking to renovate, or are you just curious? And I will set up. I will share my screen for the presentation while that's being answered. All right. All right, here I am. I feel like a weatherman, but that's all good. So I hope everyone can see the presentation now. I will proceed. So to set the tone for this presentation, I'm not going to give you a magic wand to reduce the costs of your specific project. That is not what this presentation is about. If I could give you a magic wand, or myself a magic wand, I would do it. It'd be so much easier. Estimating and value management is the bane of builders' existence, and I'm sure Ash, the Sustainable Homes Estimator, is nodding in agreement. The challenges of bringing projects in on budget. But each project is so unique, and you should work with a professional builder like Sustainable Homes Melbourne to make sure your project becomes a reality on budget. SHM is a design and build firm, though we also work with some great external architects and designers, some of which are attending this presentation. The idea when working with these architects and designers throughout the design phase is to consult and value manage the residential building projects that they have designed to ensure that they are feasible and they get built and built well. My personal view is the industry at this mid to high end of the spectrum is far too disjointed. And if you don't work with a design and build firm, you should certainly be engaging a builder early on in the design phase under an ECI or early contractor involvement arrangement. They can then work with your designer or architect to provide comprehensive costing advice. I want to be very clear that it should be comprehensive costing advice. None of that ballpark or meter rate BS that can lead people up the garden path. And I'll put my hand up. In the early days, we did that too. Throwing a meter rate or a ballpark at a custom build is just silly, and it could lead to not good outcomes, put it that way. And what you are looking for when engaging a builder in the design phase is a really valuable insight, and it gives the builder the time to invest and understand your project clearly. But the presentation today will not focus on the micro details that a process like this would. Rather, this presentation will focus on the macro level impacts the construction industry is set to face over the next few years. So the prompt for us putting together this little presentation was the release of an industry report by Arcadis in late 2024, which stated construction costs in Australia are set to rise 30 to 40% across major cities, with Melbourne to increase 34% between 2023 and 2028. Now, this is not the news anybody wanted to hear. So that is on average a 6% increase to construction costs per annum, whereas historically we used to see only a 2% increase per annum. So in practical terms, it's $1 million project today will cost an extra $60,000 in 1 year time for the exact same project. To further illustrate, this graph shows the recent trend in construction costs. I'll try and show you here. So you can see the increase we're typically used to with construction costs being around 2%. You can see it decreased leading into COVID and bottomed out near zero. And then the COVID boom, and it ramped right up to over 12% increase per annum. These yellow bars measure it at quarterly intervals. So this occurrence here resulted in construction costs increasing by 31.1% from the September quarter 2020 to the June quarter 2024, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Well, you can see the decline back to 6% here. Ultimately, what this Arcadis report is saying, that this 6% inflationary number will remain until 2028 and potentially beyond. I do want to say, as much as some of this information may sound like doom and gloom, if you are looking to build, it's better that you know it than not know it. And this information should put you ahead of the game and much better placed to manage these risks. And plus, we must build, and we must build well, and we must build sustainably. So the three key factors that we'll focus on in this presentation that will affect construction costs in Australia over the next few years are: key factor number one is consumer demand and where that is heading. Key factor number two is our housing shortage and government housing targets. And key factor number three is builders going insolvent at record rates, ultimately how supply meets demand. There is one other key factor I'm sure is on the lips of our architects and designers in the room. If anybody can guess, there might be a question pop up now. I will touch on this key factor towards the end of the presentation, but I'll give you 10 seconds to answer it. All right, that key factor that I do believe is negligible in all truth, but is the increase in the NatHERS energy efficiency ratings to 7 stars and the livable housing standards. Again, I do believe that those improvements are negligible at this end of the market, though I will touch on them briefly. So moving ahead into key factor number one, consumer demand. Now, before we go into where consumer demand is now, it's important that we understand how the last 5 or so years has played out. The COVID boom to COVID bust. Now, you'll find a lot of evidence within this presentation of how this historic event, being COVID, has dramatically impacted the industry, and its effects still ricochet through to today. Now you can see on this graph showing our total number of building approvals, which peaked during the early years of COVID, at around the same time the government released the 25K home builder grant. Since that peak, it's been a big decline and had a rocky road back to some normality. And this red line here indicates the house construction output. So you can see it's followed approvals by 12 or 18 months, peaked there in September or mid 2022. And really this mirrors what we saw in the previous graphs showing those inflation figures. And that is completely flatlined. So since the end of 2021, the industry has seen demand drastically decrease to the lowest levels I've experienced in my 25 years in the industry. Of course, we can put that down to a perfect storm, the ballooning costs of construction throughout 2021, 2 and 3, and record-breaking interest rate hikes we saw commencing in May 2022. There's a few further graphs here just to illustrate the consumer confidence levels. Ultimately, we're at recession-like levels. This graph shows it in detail, which is well below the average level since 1990. Now, this graph shows a longer-term view, and I'm not sure it quite picks up how low it actually got, but you can see we're pretty much on par with the lowest levels we've experienced since 1991, which was super low at the time. So we're not quite as low as that, but we are still very low. But a bit of positivity, I guess, here. This very recent insight from ABC News shows that it looks like consumer confidence is up and becoming not glum, which is a good sign. I presume this is because of three reasons. Inflation now looks to be under control. Interest rates are on the decline. The first cut barely touched the sides, I think, though clearly very positive, and more rate cuts will only boost optimism and confidence in the community. And crazy to say, but house prices are on the rise again. Perhaps not in Melbourne, they have plateaued, though this will only give consumers confidence, especially in this segment of the market. So with consumer confidence on the rise again, it is sure to increase demand for construction projects. From my perspective, I've been surprised the market hasn't picked up more in early 2025. At SHM, our short-term pipeline does look strong, but that still doesn't seem to be the consensus throughout the industry, especially with architects and designers who lead the way while builders are typically affected later on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As another quick question will come up, is just how you're seeing the market, especially for those building professionals in attendance, how you're seeing the market in early 2025. So moving along to key factor number 2, which is our housing shortage and government housing targets. Now, you'd have to be living under a rock to have not heard about the current housing shortage due to mass immigration and the trend, albeit short-lived, for more space in our homes as a result of COVID and work from home culture. I love Alan Kohler. I listen to him regularly, or watch him regularly on YouTube, 2 minutes of an evening, giving a great insight into, well, the economic state of the industry. He's also got a lot to say about housing. But this information here really puts it into perspective. So the Australian government's targets, absurd targets, many say, is for the nation is to build 1.2 million homes by 2029, or 240,000 homes built per year. So to put that into perspective, approvals of housing last financial year, 2024, was less than 163,000, plus nearly 20,000 of those were knockdown rebuilds, ultimately resulting in a grand total of 143,000 new dwellings. This is approved, not built. This is a long, long way off our housing targets set. To further illustrate, referring to the red line here, which again is dwelling approvals, you can see since the 1980s, there's been very rare times that we've got above 200,000 building approvals, and we haven't been able to sustain that level for very long. Now, the black line is population growth, and you can see it's sort of been up and down, but stuck reasonably close to our dwelling approvals. But at this moment in time is just completely out of whack, just through the roof. And this grey line below really tells the story. Ultimately, what it tells us is historically we've added one home per every 1.5 people we've added to the population in Australia. Whereas currently we are only adding one home per every 4 people we add to the population of Australia. Clearly a massive differential, and this is becoming a huge issue with plenty of talk but little action. And my concern is when or if that action does kick into gear, how the industry will be able to handle the increase in productivity that's needed. Key factor number 3 is builders going insolvent at record rates. Now, the graph you can see here really tells the story. As you can see, the past 3 full financial years, the numbers are stark for the construction industry. Over 6,000 construction companies have gone into administration since July 2021. The past financial year, 2024, saw 2,832 building companies enter into external administration. So for perspective, that is 55 building companies per week. That's a crazy number. Further to that, Q1 of this financial year, 2024-25, there were a further 898 construction companies enter external administration, adding to that list, and likely means that this financial year will exceed the record set in the previous. Now, this graph here shows construction businesses with less than 5 full-time employees. This red line has seen their survival rate go from around 94% up here down to 74%. I would dare say that these are small building companies without the resources to track their costs effectively. And if there is one question that you should ask your builder to understand how financially responsible they are, it is how do you track your costs? It's such an important skill or process in a building company. I feel like I should say SHM is in the 5 to 19 full-time employee range, which has moved from around 98% down to 92%. So this is the median average age of businesses. And this, which has increased from 14 years to 18 years. The interpretation of this is that younger businesses are less resilient to industry headwinds. Again, I feel like I need to say SHM are in the 12 years old, which I believe is quite mature for a building company in this space. Some positive news to end this on. So this graph shows the proportion of businesses rated high risk to very high risk, and this is construction businesses. So in 2022, that rate was over 43%. Nearly 1 in 2 businesses were rated high to very high risk, which is phenomenal, which is thankfully now down in 2024 to 20%. And hopefully, I expect that's down further in 2025 to 15%. Let's somewhere there. Presumably, the interpretation here, which I heard a lot of in the early days of this bust, is that a clean out of the industry is a good thing. And those good operators are the ones left. I do tend to agree, though this clean out has gone way too far and caused an awful lot of pain for many. And the reality is the builders that are coming up and obtaining their builder's license to new builders, they don't have the capacity of those builders that have exited, nowhere near the capacity of those builders that have exited. So the increasing number of builders and construction companies entering into external administration will put immense strain on the industry, making it even harder to meet the demand needed to address our housing shortage. On top of that, we're expecting a surge in consumer demand as households that have been holding back the past few years are now gaining confidence and getting ready to move ahead with their building projects. I mean, at least this graph shows that the building companies available to engage are in much better positions than they have been in recent years. The one last key factor that's worth touching on is the regulatory improvements of homes in Australia. This is the first thing any designer or architect says to me, how this will have impact on construction costs. I'm not as familiar with the livable housing requirements, though I honestly believe that changes will have little impact on the cost of construction projects, particularly in this mid to high-end inner city market. I do empathise with designers and architects, as I'm sure having to comply in all instances with this can be painful, and of course compliance often does equal money. So there's an argument there that will increase costs, but I do believe it's negligible. What I'm very well aware of, though, is what it takes to build a NatHERS 7-star home, and Sustainable Homes, we've been doing that for years. The jump from 6 to 7 stars is negligible, especially within the sphere of work that we do, and I'm sure many people do here. And if only people knew how far the average Australian home is behind the rest of the world in terms of the energy efficiency and the quality of our homes, there'd be no pushback in this regard. The one issue I do have with the changes around energy efficiency is the attempt that people who are renovating or extending their homes beyond 50% of their current home, it then triggers that whole home must meet a full NatHERS 7-star compliance. And this often means, the upgrade of windows and roofing to the existing part of the home and insulation, which is all very sensible and ideal, of course, if you can afford it. But this can add tens of thousands of dollars to a project and ultimately make a project unfeasible. When people have gone through a design process and focused on the extension of a home, often what we'll do is focus on the extension area, always zoning that area, but making that area, world class, maybe to European standards type of thing. So that area will perform really, really well. And then typically bedrooms that are left, bedrooms, again, in my view, don't need to perform as well because you can moderate temperature in other ways in the bedroom. You got a duvet to manage that. So that's the one gripe I do have with the changes at this point. There is a workaround to that compliance issue. We don't have time to go into it now. But ultimately, in conclusion, the increase to NatHERS 7-star is negligible and the paybacks are huge in terms of health, comfort, and energy efficiency. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you all for your time. I hope you found something valuable in there. Ultimately, the 3 key factors that will have an impact on construction costs over the next few years I've laid out there. Of course, there is a 4th with those compliance items. Likelihood is that ACADIS report may well be correct. So if you are holding back My advice would be jump the queue and get moving with your building project, and will likely save tens of thousands of dollars. I'll now hand over to Nisha if to throw any of your questions at me. Of course, please all use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions.
Oh, so I've got one here from Darren, and he's asked, why do you think builders are continuing to go broke in large numbers versus pre-COVID? A lot of people and businesses felt optimistic once getting through the hardest period over COVID and feeling like projects had been quoted more accurately. And then he said, feel like there is much greater community openness and free sharing of information along with advanced technologies and business coaching should have a more positive impact.
Yes. Yeah. I do think it's still a drag effect from the COVID boom and bust. And that was a difficult period to manage for most businesses. And, so ultimately what we had is businesses taking on a lot of work, a lot of employees, a lot of burden, a lot of overhead. And then at the end of 2021 or maybe 2022, we saw that just drop off. So those building companies that didn't manage that drop off well would often find themselves in debt and with poor cash flow, with projects not coming in, and certainly just be a challenging time. So I think again, it comes back to that financial management system of many businesses.
Oh, and I've got one here from Roger. Materials and labor costs were obviously a major contributor through COVID. Is this settling as seen in your research?
Yes, yes, it has settled. It's certainly settled, although I was in a meeting with Bowen's and some of their suppliers late last year, and there was a fair bit of commentary around some big suppliers increasing their cost of their materials this year. And that was due to energy prices. I heard of a company that we use a lot of. Probably don't feel like I should mention their name here, but a company we use a lot of. I know that they use an awful lot of solar and renewable energy, so they wouldn't be taking a lot from the grid. And they were told by their energy supplier that their energy bill would increase $500,000 per year. So that obviously needs to be passed on to the consumer.
Mhm. Okay, I've got an anonymous one here. Consumer confidence is picking up, but the demands for new build is still low. Do you think projects will suddenly take off or will growth be more steady?
Yeah, it's probably the likelihood is growth will be steady, especially that filtration model, I suppose, where so many, especially at this end of things, we're not talking about the greenfields end, but this urban inner city end of things where people approach architects first, and then just that pipeline of or the design process can take a while to filter through to builders. So I think it will be a gradual effect, yeah, which will coincide with consumer confidence.
Cool. Another anonymous one. With the increase in builders going into liquidation and inflation in costs, there's also been an impact to domestic building insurance. Has this been significant over the last year? Is this rise expected to continue?
Yeah, I hope not. So I think it's risen twice in 2 years, um, and the most recent one more substantial than the first. So I suppose that's got a lot to do with the builders going insolvent. So I think we've gotten on top of that, going by a few of those graphs, that the high and very high risk is much lower than it was. So yeah, I'd expect that would drop. Again, I mean that is it. They've been huge increases. But again, probably adding $5,000 to the cost of a sort of $1 million build. I suppose it does all add up though.
One more. The government's target of 1.2 million new homes by 2029 seems extremely ambitious. What practical changes need to happen in the industry to make this a reality?
Yeah, That's a good question. Yeah, an awful lot.
Mm.
Um, I think that government will be very challenged to do it in the private sector. I think it'll involve a lot of apartment building, and a lot of modular building to achieve anything like those targets. Um, yeah, I think it's a very challenging exercise, but clearly we need to build more. Maybe not hit those targets isn't reasonable, but we certainly need to ramp up productivity, and hanging on to good builders will be a big part of that. So, and of course, fixing planning, uh, our planning scheme, which is terrible. We need to fast track that for sure.
Um, cool. And I've got another anonymous one here. Given the projected 30 to 40% increase in construction costs, what are the most practical steps homeowners and designers can take to manage costs without compromising on quality?
Yeah, it's well, you've got to get building advice early in design. There's no other way to, especially in this custom arena. There's no other way to manage construction costs for a custom project rather than get a builder involved as early as practical, providing really detailed and insightful advice. That's the only that's the best bit of advice I think I can give for people managing and value managing construction projects.
Oh, and I've got another one here from Roger. I feel like there is an obvious risk to sustainability trends like passive house due to the overall rise in costs resulting in priorities going to other things. Have you found this to be the case, or do you see people being more conscious of this and want to prioritize despite the perceived costs?
Yes, yeah. So we've had a few clients with in this realm of things. I think it's sort of enviable and a great position for a person to be in to be able to afford to go all the way to passive house for their house. I do believe it's like the Rolls Royce of homes. At the same time, I believe you can get by really well with a Subaru. So I think you can go a long way towards passive house, but not all the way, and get an incredible resulting home. And of course, a budget to suit as well. So I think there's a lot to manage through there, but I think there's a lot of a simple approach to really high performing homes that can and should be adopted. Potentially, well, certainly not everyone needs to go all the way to passive house.
Yep, brilliant. One here from Nicole. Is there any significant work being done from a design perspective to lower building costs? And would the new regs around prefab have an impact on building costs? Can builders like yourself utilize parts of prefab in your builds to lower costs? So it's kind of
Yeah,
3 questions there. I can reread it if you need.
yeah. It's an interesting concept. I have to think that modular play a big part in, yeah, cost efficiencies and productivity. It's challenging at our end of thing, or in a city. Some of our homes that are probably beyond 10 kilometers out of Fitzroy are more suitable to the modular, and we are looking at it more and more. I think there's great advantages there. Um, but yeah, it feels like we're still at the early days of modular in Australia. I know some European countries have adopted it much quicker, and I think Norway or Denmark or somewhere there might be upwards of 90% of their homes are modular. So I do think there's great opportunity there for sure.
Cool. That's all the questions I've got for you, Simon.
Cool. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you all for joining us here today. We hope you've got some value for your next building project. At Sustainable Homes, Mel, we're passionate about creating healthy, comfortable, and sustainable homes. And given the expected price rises the industry is set to face, getting started on your building project um, sooner rather than later is definitely advantageous to you. If you have any questions that weren't covered today, feel free to contact us on any of this information, or if you'd like to discuss a project that you're interested in doing. We'll also send a follow-up email after today with today's recording, And so keep an eye on your inbox for that. Our next presentation will be on the ECI process, so the early contractor involvement process, and how engaging a builder early in the design process can ensure a much higher chance your project gets built and built well and built on budget. So keep an eye on that in the coming weeks. Once again, thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Nisha.
Thanks, guys. Bye.